Thanks for coming out. It's good to be here talking about net zero. I mean, in the end, we're talking about climate change. We're talking about solutions. And I think in Australia, for a long time, it's been a very frustrating thing because we've seen the effects of climate change, but we haven't necessarily seen a lot of action. And not only have we seen the effects, we've seen this kind of warnings about how much worse it's going to get. And of course, those warnings don't feel hollow anymore because, funnily enough, all the predictions for a long time turned out to be true. So that question of, what are we actually doing about it has been very frustrating. But the great thing now is that we now have so many solutions. And that's what a day like today is about. Out there, all the different stalls, all the conversations we're going to have in here are going to be a lot about those solutions and how we get to them. And that is the exciting part of it. And Australia is, we're behind in some ways, we're ahead in others. In solar, for instance, we're massively ahead of the world in some ways. I mean, we have the kind of world leading in terms of household solar. We really do lead the world in that. And in terms of the technology, a lot of it was invented down the road at UNSW. We kind of shipped it overseas and it gets made elsewhere now, but we have been at the forefront of that. So at the moment now in Australia, just small households and small businesses putting solar on creates about 28,000 gigawatt hours of energy a year. And you go, I don't know what the hell that is, do you? None of us get gigawatt hours on. If you get gigawatt hours on your bill, your kids are really cranking the electricity too much, or maybe they're growing some marijuana under the house. But, that basically is the amount of power it's about twice the amount of power that the Eraring coal-fired power station pumps out every year. And that's the biggest coal-fired power station in Australia. So we are slowly pushing that stuff out of the grid, and we need to be doing it more. So if you put the solar we've got on our rooftops, you put the solar on those big solar farms, you put the wind power, you put the hydro in Australia all together, we're just under 40% renewable energy right now, which is great. It's a really quick change that we're seeing. And you kind of go, how do we get those next steps? 40% is definitely not enough. We've got a lot of work to do there, and that's what today is partly about, and what some of the panels we'll have today. But the question becomes, how far can we go? South Australia is currently just under 70% renewable energy. South Australia. So South Australia is actually kind of leading the world in terms of showing that, hey, you can have a grid with all this different energy, and you get batteries, and you get solar storage, this kind of stuff, and it actually works. So we really are in a great position. And, AEMO, the boring regulators who do all the energy down in Canberra, they've put the roadmap to 100%. They've kind of figured out how we can get there. It's no longer, it's something we can do. And it's going to take action from all of us. I guess, some of us at that next step of going, well, do we get batteries on? How do we do that kind of stuff? And we need to get batteries in households, and then government needs to build, pumped hydro and that kind of stuff. But the solutions are actually out there. So it is quite exciting, a lot of those cases. It is very exciting to have battery in a house. I've got to the situation where occasionally you get paid by an energy provider. That's a pretty sweet thing because it feels terrible when you have to pay them all the time. But the questions, the next steps, and I think a lot of the conversation, a lot of people here today will be quite along that journey. The next steps become that question of, okay, we've got all this renewable energy in Australia. How do we then make it so it's the thing that we cook with, it's the thing that we drive with, it's the thing that we transport, and all these other things. And that's kind of where we're at today. And I think some of the stalls here will be talking about that, about electrifying. How do you electrify all those different things? And I guess the final question on when it comes to net zero is that question of, well, what do you do about the things you can't? You can't yet. There's not the technology there yet. Do you kind of do an offset, for instance? And we might touch on that throughout the day as well. I think the instance with that is when is it okay to try and offset something? Firstly, it's got to be a proper offset. Secondly, it's got to only be where there's no other solutions. There are lots of positive solutions coming, and I think it's great that we can talk about those things today. It's interesting. In some ways, I'm more positive about this. I do war and waste program, and I do climate programs and that kind of thing. I actually think in some cases there's more positives on the climate front than there are sometimes on the waste front. If you were to say to me, Craig, by 2050, is Australia going to be 100% renewable energy, or are we going to solve the problem of plastic? I'm much more positive about the renewable energy side than I am about the plastic side. It's like plastic in so many cases, I spend a lot of time running into a wall because you look at it and go, okay, this solution's there, not necessarily there yet. Whereas in a lot of these kind of climate things, there really are. And it's not saying it's easy. It's a big change we've got to make, but it's really positive that we can actually make this change. So it's great to see that we can have this kind of stuff. And the good thing as well is that, as we'll find out today, often it's not only better for climate, environment, often you get to save money as well. And it's that difficult thing of kind of going, well, it's going to cost me up front, but long term, I don't have the money now. It's a difficult time. We're all suffering from very expensive bills. So how do we actually overcome that problem there, and how do we do it? now. And this comes down to a thing that I think is a big question that I often get asked. Whose responsibility is it? Like, sometimes I feel like people get bogged down with this. It's like, don't ask me to do something because it's, 100 companies in the world that are creating most of the emissions, or don't ask me to do something because the government's not doing something, or don't ask me to do it because the council's got to do this. And the reality is, the only way that we can overcome this problem is by all of us working together. It's not a question of one versus the other that actually has to do it. So I can buy an EV, but I can't put in EV infrastructure everywhere, can I? I've asked my council, can I start putting up EV chargers in the street? They say no for some reason. Ausgrid gets very annoyed at me if I start doing it myself, that kind of stuff. So you need to be working together in this kind of thing. You need the government to be putting in place, discounts and that kind of stuff, making it easy to get there. I mean, Australia's gone from a position where a few years ago we had almost no EVs and very few choices to now getting a lot more. But if I look, my brother's in America, he could choose between 100 different EVs. We're well and truly behind. So it needs to be all different parts working together and doing that kind of stuff. Another great example of that is Northern Beaches Council. Your council getting 100% renewable energy and buying that is a great step. And it frustrates the hell out of me when I meet councils that haven't done that yet, particularly because I think you saved nearly $2 million over 7 years by doing it. So you save money, get 100% renewable energy. That's the first step. That's the easy step that every council should be doing. The next step becomes then, how does a council help everyone else make the changes? Because there are difficulties sometimes, aren't there? Like, I know so many people who have been looking to get solar for years, or just they hit a trust barrier, or they're not sure, or they get dodgy people calling them up, and all that kind of, that trust gets in the way. And that's another way where councils and governments can get in the way and go, hey, we know these are the things that are standing in your way. It's not necessarily about giving you the money to do it. It's just about going, we're going to make sure you get the right thing. We're going to make sure you get a trusted provider and it can actually do that kind of stuff. So that's one of the processes. But also, I mean, what a council can do is then go, okay, we got 100% renewable energy by a very boring thing called a power purchase agreement. You go, and now you're working with business now to do the same thing. So it doesn't make sense for your business down the road can't do that on their own, right? So that you just go, well, if the council or government can get you together and you kind of get a big group of people together, and then you can get renewable energy, cheaper energy, and you can do it by working together. And that's the kind of fundamental things where, again, it's about working together to overcome these problems. And yeah, we need a lot more effort. We're kind of getting steps at the federal level. It sometimes feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's a frustrating process, but we are certainly making some steps forward there. And I guess the question then becomes what part of the journey you're on as a group of people. And everyone will be at different stages of this. And some will be very much at the beginning and starting off. Some of you will be absolute tech nerds. They're going to just know every single thing about how many kilowatt hours you use at every moment, and you've made it so that, some people, I meet people who are like, I download all this energy during the day, I store it, then I sell it back to the grid late in the afternoon and make a profit off it. Some people are well and truly along this journey, and they're on their third EV and that kind of stuff. And I guess the question is, well, what can you do then? If you're one of those people who's a long way along the journey, I think it's a big thing is about talking to people in your community about it. Just telling them your experiences, telling them what you've learned, what were the bad things, tell them good and bad. Hey, I hit this problem, but I've figured out I can overcome it this way. Telling people your stories of what you've been able to do is a really important part of it. Also, though, figure out the level of interest of the people you're talking to, right? If you're a massive energy tech nerd, right, don't always start with that, right? Just go down low. Hey, I saved hundreds of dollars. That can be a good start, rather than going, well, my kilowatt hours over the, just figure out your audience doing that kind of stuff. And for those who are just starting, I guess, ask the questions. Find the people that can help you with this kind of stuff and get along the journey. Because it is, we're at that, we're trying to get that momentum right now, and it could be really great that we see that happening. So, look, it's an exciting place to be in. There are lots of things in it, things like, again, you at home can try and reduce food waste and do this kind of stuff and reduce that kind of stuff. In the end, it's up to your government. Your councils are going to be able to go, hey, food waste doesn't go in your landfill bin. It ends up going somewhere else and creating compost. That's the kind of stuff. It has to be us all working together. And that's what today is really great. We're going to get going with our first panel now. We're going to have people from all different parts. We're going to have people from just in the community. We're going to have experts. We're going to have people from the council, from government, all these different things. And now, we're going to have Q&A as well, right? Which is great. So, we'll kind of go. I will try to make sure we get through in time. I'll wrap people up if they're talking too long, so that we can get through and actually have questions and answer from you guys. Because I think that's always the most important part, is going, you have questions, you're like, oh, I've hit a wall here. And this is the thing about this, is that the journey towards net zero, and I've been on this journey for many years, it's not a simple, going for. It is constantly going this way and hitting a wall and figuring out and getting around it and going, hang on a second, I can't do this. Who do I need help from? I talk to my council, I talk to my government, or I talk to somebody else, or I campaign against this kind of thing. It's a long journey, but it's a really great journey, and it's exciting as well. And the more you get into it, the more exciting it becomes, the more you save money, but the more you also feel this amazing sense of achievement, because in the end, you do reduce emissions, and it's not a case of us going back and living in caves. That's not the solution going forward. We have amazing solutions, although sometimes caves can be quite cool. I don't know. But there are amazing solutions out there. It's a question of finding out how can we get them as quickly as possible. How do we get the help from everyone else around us to do it? And it really is a community effort that is the most amazing. So let's get on with the conversation today. Let me get to the wonderful panellists who we're going to be introducing up here. All right, so today, our first one is the net zero panel discussion. Okay, so this is talking about net zero, the big picture. So we're going to start with that, then we've got other conversations about solar, about EVs, about all this kind of stuff. So to have this conversation, we've got Terry Nehemiah from the Energy Division of New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. So he's our government representative. We've got Professor Alistair Sproul, who's from the School of Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy at the Engineering UNSW. We've got Yanni Mentis from the Environment and Climate Change Business Unit at Northern Beaches Council there. Put hand up, Yanni. There you go. We've got Angel Amber Scutts, who is our local youth advisory group. She's going to keep us on path, make sure we're doing the right path here. And we've got David Stewart, who's from Colourmaker Industries and the winner of the 2023 Business Sustainability Award. As I said, the Q&A. Now, just so you know, for these people, there's a few slides we'll be going so you can see them. These guys can't necessarily see them, so if they keep talking to you like this, you'll understand why they're doing that, okay? G'day, Professor. All right, let's kick off to make sure we're going to have enough time later on for the Q&A at the end. All right, to kick all this off, each panel member, I want to give you just give a one-liner. Tell us about your organisation, where you come from, your area of expertise. This is just a quick, this is like not a long thing, this is kind of speed dating, okay? It's okay. Professor, we'll start with you. Oh, have you got a microphone? We'll start at the other end. David.
Oh, that's okay. Hello, Professor Alistair Sproul, School of Photovoltaic Renewable Energy Engineering at University of New South Wales. We've been in the research for 40 to 50 years. We've been teaching renewables for 20 years, and our school, UNSW technology now in about 90% of all solar modules made in the world today, so very proud of that.
Hi, good morning. My name's Angel Ambas. I'm part of the Youth Advisory Group. I've been in climate activism since about 2021. I'm just a member of the community who cares about the future.
My name's Terry Nehemiah. I'm from the mouthful of a department name, but we can call it DQ. New South Wales Government is all I guess you probably need to know. My role is the Director of Program and Market Development. I look after a bunch of different programs in the energy efficiency, climate change sort of space, from the electric vehicle team that's out the back there, the stand that you can have a wander through to some of our energy efficiency programs. But I'm an electrical engineer. I'm really, really passionate about ways that we can get to net zero by thinking intelligently, and that's brought me into this line of work. So both interesting and professional.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. My name's Yanni Mentis. I'm the Executive Manager, Environment and Climate Change for Northern Beaches Council. A very nice thing about working for Northern Beaches Council is they have a unit with the word climate change within them, which is an unreal thing. Excuse me, I should have done that beforehand. Sorry about that.
Stop calling Yanni.
Yeah, that's a bit. Start off with a fail. The Environment and Climate Change team has got broad responsibilities, including opening and closing that lagoon, which some of you are familiar with, taking care of bush care, bushfires, but also we're ultimately responsible for sustainability, and therefore it's my team that has been involved in setting up this event. We are chuffed that the weather gods did what they did. And by the way, can I just say, I would like Craig to work for us, but I don't think we can compete with the ABC. But
Mate, if I'd have to get up at 3:30 in the morning, you might be able to compete, to be honest.
But yeah, thank you to all of you for being here, and especially also thank you to the panellists.
Hi, thanks, Yanni. I'm David Stewart. I'm from Colourmaker Industries down at Brookvale. I'm an industrial chemist. I worked in laboratories for 10 years, but I heard about the greenhouse effect back in 1976, and it's always stuck with me. So I bought Colourmaker 21 years ago. The first thing we did was develop a solvent-free product, but we started our solar journey about 5 years ago. We put on 100 kilowatts of solar. Before we started, our bills were over $24,000, and now they're negative. And we've got 4 EVs that we run off the roof as well. So it's not a cost anymore, it's a revenue stream, and but every roof can do it. So
Don't give it all away now, David. Keep them waiting for later, okay? It's good to hear you say, I've heard about the greenhouse effect in 1976, the year I was born, and it hasn't... Look how long it took us to actually do something about it. It's great to see. All right, Yanni, we're going to start off with you. Now, the questions have been put up here, so there's a lot for you, but we won't go through them all at once. But let's start with, what does net zero mean? Does it cover all greenhouse gases? And is net zero the same as carbon neutral? Okay, let's start kind of in that area.
Okay, yeah. Let's quickly start with, does it cover the greenhouse gases? Yes, it does. It covers most greenhouse gases, unless the term that you're using is a specific thing like carbon net zero. Net zero refers generally to all greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of what it is, I want to go the simple one, and I'll leave the complexities to perhaps to the professor and others. But simplistically, our wonderful Mother Earth is capable of balancing a lot of things, as you know. And one of the significant systems that it needs to balance is the atmosphere and the gases within it. The Earth has a capability through numerous sinks, forests, oceans, soils, to capture quite a bit of carbon, but we've gone a bit too far. And so achieving net zero really is all about us trying to bring it back to a balance and trying to achieve where the Earth is looking to be, which is a balance between the carbon that it's consuming and the carbon that it's emitting. We are emitting way too much, and so the whole business of net zero involves us trying to achieve that through processes that we're going to talk about today.
But you're looking, I mean, you're not looking at the world as a whole, are you? Are you looking at the councils, for instance, emissions, and how you achieve net zero there? Is that where you're looking?
We are, but we're conscious that there's a measure that's involved with that, and so everybody's contribution is important. We can't deny that, and that's part of the reason why council is trying to lead by example.
And so the question about does zero actually mean zero, and what is scope 1, 2 and 3? I mean, it's very early in the morning for this question, guys, but it's up there, so I'm going to ask it. What is scope 1, 2 and 3 in embodied emissions, and why are they important, and how do we measure them?
So an organisation, or even yourselves, uses a whole bunch of different energy and generates emissions in different ways. Scope 1 refers to energy, and scope 1 and 2 are indirect emissions that come as a consequence of the use of either vehicles, for example, or when you're purchasing electricity from an electricity supplier, there's emissions associated with those. So they're scope 1 and 2. And scope 3 involves those emissions where they're kind of ancillary to what you do, like, for example, you jump in a cab, or they're outside of, they're indirect. I guess in terms of how you measure them, it has become quite sophisticated now, and council's on a journey to doing that, but doing carbon inventories is very important. It's not expected that you'll do that, but you do get a lot of information both from your suppliers, and also you can get that from council on how much emissions you're emitting, and working towards reducing those is the important part of this today.
Yeah, it's lucky he said you're not going to have to do it yourself. Can I say, for the Fight for Planet A show, we spent so many months trying to figure out the emissions of certain foods. It was a nightmare. But this is the thing, is that as there's some rules going through government at the moment, which will kind of ask big companies with more than 500 employees to start tracking their emissions. And once they start tracking, it's easier for them to kind of be able to put those emissions on an actual, on your cereal container or on your jeans or something, so that you can actually start having that understanding as well, because it's not something that we can personally do ourselves. So, we are moving towards that place where we're going to track it a lot more and understand a bit more. Okay, so talking about net zero, the next question is how do we get there? And let's start with what is the government doing. Terry, let's start with what's the government doing to get to net zero?
Cool, yeah. Look, I guess I've recently read Simon Sinek's book, so I'll start with why. And Craig's done a pretty good job of painting the picture, but I think it's also important having government representatives on the board, on a panel like this, to come out and say that it's, quite frankly, the climate is changing, that this isn't a future state, this isn't a thing that we're worried about might happen in the future. We know our emissions have already had an impact on our environment, on the climate, and on our well-being. And if that wasn't enough, our economy. So this is something that's already here, and it's something that's really impacting us now. So at the forefront, and this is something fairly recent, the New South Wales government has now legislated emissions targets. So that commits government departments and teams like myself, as well as our stakeholders, to take proactive action to actually reduce our emissions over time, and ultimately to get to that net zero by 2050 state that we talk about, which still feels like the distant future, but is going to be here before we know it. So we have a whole bunch of different programs that are set up to try and help get us there, but also to support the economy and support society to get there as well. And they're from the big end of town, from those highest, largest emitters like steel making processes and things like that are really quite difficult to get to net zero. But also households and small to medium businesses that can be supported through different energy efficiency sort of opportunities that get them along the road. And I'll talk, I'm actually on a panel a little bit later if I can drill into a little bit more detail on that. And of course, then there's the electricity that we're all going to need to use, and we've got a bipartisan approach to renewable energy in this state, which is fantastic, which is all about building the infrastructure to bring renewable energy to the grid so that we can use it. That's really, really important, but I'm a big demand-side person and demand-side nerd, so there's things we can do at the consumption side that have as much, if not sometimes a greater impact. And there's things that we can cast out to allow people to be able to take control of what they're doing. So if you're renting and you're unable to make your own electricity through solar, there's green energy schemes that make sure that you can work with the retailer to be sure that you're buying renewable energy and not just an offset, that it's actually been validated that they're using renewable energy power purchasing agreements. So effectively taking advantage of things like we talked about before with the council, but at home through your energy retailer. And then we've got to work where we work right across all levels of government, and Commonwealth Government has a whole bunch of programs and initiatives to support this, and events like this that are run by local government. And it's really, really important. I think Craig said it really well. We don't get there by working at any particular level alone. This is something we need to work together on. And if we all take those steps, if we all move in the right direction, then it is something that I'm really hopeful we can get to.
Yeah, and if you're somebody that works with government, the fact that the government's now got a net zero target, if you're still a business working with them or being members of the public, you can kind of go, hang on a second, you've got this target, why aren't we doing this or why aren't we doing this? It's a great way of feeding back to the government saying, you have a target, we're not doing enough to get to that. Also good to note though, the point that Terry made that it's a bipartisan approach. We're very lucky in New South Wales that we do kind of have a bipartisan. We're very frustrating in Australia because at some point it seemed to be as if climate change was a left-right issue. It's not. The climate doesn't care what side of politics you're on. It will stuff you up big time. So it's great that it's, we have a bit of bipartisanship here. And Matt Keane has been one of the, sometimes the best spokesperson on some of these issues as well. So it's good. We're in a good position on that particular front. Yanni, do you want to take us through what the council is doing on getting to net zero?
Yep, I'd be happy to. As I said, I got this job around about 5 years ago, and I was absolutely chuffed about the fact that the role was Executive Manager Environment and Climate Change, because it meant that this council had a commitment to focusing on climate change as a key issue. The council made a commitment in 2019, or at least acknowledged that we're in a climate emergency, which was very important. So all the councillors agreed to that, and as well as that, of course, we committed to our environment and climate change strategy, which has a number of aspirations and targets, committed targets in it, including council committing on your behalf that we would achieve a net zero outcome by 2050. So that's a fairly significant focus, and of course events like this and leading towards that, we need to obviously engage with the community to do that. In terms of other things that we've done from a policy perspective, in 2020 our local strategic planning statement, which is essentially our blueprint for how we're going to plan into the future, identified and highly emphasised sustainability. It was in the front of the book, which was also unreal from my perspective, because it made all the things that I was working on very, very important. And we know that because the community is very, very interested in it here on the Northern Beaches. Certainly, every time we do any pulse surveys, the environment and climate change registers right up the top of the list. So very important that we acknowledge that at Council, and we have policies in place and action plans in place to address those things. We've also got a resilience strategy and a waste and circular economy strategy that are a little bit more recent, 2022 and 2024, and both of those have significant targets on behalf of Council, of course, but also on behalf of the community. So with those things in place and with action plans behind them, we're working towards working with you to make sure that we can make those things happen.
I just want to ask you on that, Yanni, as well. So it's good to see this. You see, if you go back, you've got the once you took on the power purchase agreement, so you purchased 100% renewable energy for the council, massively brought down the emissions you're doing. Can we just talk about that next step and just power purchase agreement is a very boring thing, and I do thank you for not going to sleep when I said those words. But basically, what it is that if you're a council or a big business, for instance, you might use a lot of energy and you can't necessarily get all that energy from solar panels or wind on your own roof, right? So what you do is you go, well, we're going to purchase it from a solar provider down in the country, in Orange. Where's the one that you guys have got?
Wellington.
Wellington. So Wellington, there's a solar power there, and all of the energy for the Northern Beaches Council is
wind,
purchased
actually.
It's wind. It's wind, okay. All the wind comes from that particular area down there, right? Now, obviously, for a business and that kind of thing, it's hard to necessarily do that on your own. So you're looking at kind of getting together businesses so that if you get enough people, and this was done, Melbourne Council did this, they got together universities, businesses and that in the area, and they all went together and kind of went, hey, we're a big, massive group of people, so we'll buy heaps of energy, and they got cheap renewable energy, that kind of stuff. So you're trying to do that in the area with businesses.
That's right. So that process is basically drawing on the experience that we had with the power purchasing agreement that we developed ourselves. We went out to the market at the beginning of last year, identified what's called an aggregator, that's a business called Business Green Energy, and their responsibility is to communicate with the local community, plus obviously we're helping out with that as much as we practically can, with a view to doing exactly what Craig's just mentioned. It's basically you need for the power company, that is the renewable power company, to feel comfortable with the idea of developing that kind of thing. They need a certain level of contributors and people being involved, but we're working towards getting that. And if we need to go beyond council, we'll do that. But obviously we would prefer that it was just a whole bunch of people from within our local area. But ultimately the intent is to develop exactly that, a gross number of people who will be able to purchase electricity through this renewable process.
So if you're part of a business, chat to the council about it, because what it does do is it kind of helps people who are going, I want to build a solar farm or a wind farm, I need the guarantee that I'm going to have customers for the first 5 years. That gets helped by this kind of stuff, and then you get more of that stuff built, which really helps there. Terry, I'm going to ask you a question without notice, just because I've been meaning to look this up for ages, so you're doing your homework for me. I recognise you may not know the answer to this, but if anyone else has any homework they don't need done later, we're going to ask Terry. Do you have any concept of what proportion of the government's energy they have now purchased from renewable energy or get from renewable energy sources? Do you know where we sit on that?
Fantastic question, and the answer is I don't know the answer to that, but I know that there is similar arrangements happening with government power purchasing agreements. The transport sector, for example, your electrified public transport now is 100% renewable energy. That's all through a PPA, and that's the vast majority. That sounds like someone might know the answer to that better than I, but I know we're either there or we're on the path to that, because it was all part of the...
Do you know the answer, Prof?
No. Look, I don't know that bit of your homework, Craig, but, I just wanted to make this statement that PPAs are great because the cheapest electricity for any large entity is to enter into a renewable energy PPA, and why all schools, hospitals, universities, government are not on PPAs for renewables is another piece of homework for someone. But that really should be happening, because University of New South Wales, we decided 7 years ago to look at a PPA for 100% solar. At the time, solar was more expensive. The legal process takes some time. So by the time the lawyers agreed, solar was the cheapest option on the table, no subsidies. We could buy 100% renewable, and it was the cheapest deal in town.
Yeah. And I know that Canberra, when ACT did this as well, they were one of the first people to do it, and they got it, and they paid a little bit extra, and then the Ukraine war happened, and then they were laughing. They got the cheapest energy by a long way. All right, Angel, let's move to you. Let's get to the youth perspective on this. Is net zero kind of on your cohort's radar? What do you think the youth want to see, and what can we do to capture their support and action?
I was going to open this by saying yes, thanks for listening, but I think I should maybe actually talk to the point. For young people, it's impossible to ignore the impacts of climate change in our future. We are the generation that will face the full brunt of climate change if urgent action is not taken. A study done by The Lancet identified that 59% of 10,000 people aged 16 to 25 were very or extremely worried about climate change, and 84% were at least moderately worried. From school strikes for climate to social media activism, young people are vocal and engaged in the fight against ecological disaster. We are not just aware of net zero, but demanding it. Today, we understand that achieving net zero is vital to our survival and our futures. But most importantly, we understand the importance of business and governments to act to address climate change. Net zero is on our radar as young people, not just as a personal responsibility, but seeking to hold those with power accountable to ensure that net zero target is met for the betterment of the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Angel, the kind of youth strike for climate and all that kind of stuff has been a really important part of it. And it's been interesting going along to those things, because you see kind of grandparents turning up and parents, and kind of there's a realisation this is a kind of generational issue. We are leaving most of the problems to the next generation. How much can we do ourselves at this point? Do you think we're making steps in the right direction, Angel? How do you feel?
Yeah, we are. I think having people engage, and the fact that people are turning up today means that people care, and if the people care, change will happen. Our cohort, first and foremost, wants to see action, ambitious policies that address the direct causes of the environmental crisis. Often we see political groups and companies subjecting us to greenwashing and attempting to sway a youth vote or a youth purchase without actually doing anything for the climate. Governments and businesses must commit to substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, not just symbolic gestures. We need investments in renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, and phasing out fossil fuels.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the difficult ones. We've just seen the Araring power station be extended for another couple of years. It's that kind of frustration that we see, that feel a bit of a step backwards there. But that said, that was reduced from where it was going to be. So we're steps forward, steps backwards, as I said at the beginning. So yeah, it's good to see we're making some steps. Now, it's interesting because, look, there are a lot of people, a lot of youth who are going, we need to make this action. A lot of people are saying we need to make this action no matter what the cost, and I certainly believe that. But for some people, they're not as convinced, or they're kind of like, well, what's the cost of this going to be? What's the cost up front? What's the cost long term? So we're going to look at the economic costs and benefits of going net zero. Terry, we'll start with you, then we'll go to the professor.
Perfect. Look, the answer is there is, of course, costs to the transition. That's true of any change we make. Anything we do really has some cost. The real good news in the shift to a net zero future is that those costs, in most cases, lead to substantially lower costs in the future, and like that can be very difficult for individuals. I appreciate that. That's we're a little bit. It's a little bit trickier at an individual level to go to the home board or something like that and come up with some long-term cash management plan that sees something pay off over 10 years. But there certainly are a whole lot of savings that can come through that. Whether that's electricity costs, if you invest in some energy efficiency at home, or move off some gas appliances to heat pump hot water, there's a little bit of an upfront cost, and then long-term energy savings, and things like electric vehicles. There's no doubt that they cost a little bit more to start with, but they have substantially lower running costs, and almost zero maintenance costs in many cases. There's no burning engine to go and get serviced by a mechanic every 10,000 kilometres. You still need to maintain it, but it's a substantially lower cost. And if you're keen for more information, you can check out our stand over there as the plug. But there's also a whole lot of costs to not doing this. That's, I think, my biggest message here. And I think it often gets lost that we worry, we see it's a status quo bias. We see the doing nothing or not changing trajectory as a neutral position, when in this case, that's not true. We're already paying higher insurance premiums because it's more likely now than it was a few years ago that a flood or a fire was going to hit you in certain situations. Our taxpayer dollars are getting dedicated to fixing roads with potholes in them because of the flood that happened the third year in a row. We have to fix roads and infrastructure after fires. So there's a substantial cost of not doing something in this space. Neutral status quo is not a zero cost sum, and compared to that, investing in climate change is substantially a better option. We save money in the long term by improving our long-term insurance premium levels. We save money in the long term by making everything more resilient to reducing the risk in the first case, but also making assets more resilient and not need replacing in the future. And we can then save everyone's hip pocket along the way if we buy it through the business case for the government dabbling in this, pushing in this area and providing incentives is that in the long run it saves us money, and it's not just net zero. By taking action in this space, that's not the only emission and pollutant in town. There are many that come that by improving our state of affairs in this space, we typically remove a whole bunch of other things from the environment. And EVs is a really, really easy case to talk about that with. Currently, we've got these burning engines throwing things out of their exhaust pipes driving around as the norm. As we move to electric, not only is that net zero, not only is there a way that we can power that with totally renewable energy, but that means our streets are then quiet. We reduce noise pollution, and the particulate emissions from exhaust pipes, particularly in cities, is a huge impact on people's health. We don't notice it because it's just always been there, but there is a quantifiable, and it's been quantified in the billions dollar of health impacts from people breathing in particulate emissions, both from tailpipe emissions and around coal-fired power stations and things like that. So it's not just about carbon emissions and carbon equivalent. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we also take out and save ourselves in the long run on health.
Yeah, it's a good point, Terry. Actually, it's funny. I was thinking the other day, like if some brilliant scientist came up with an overnight solution to climate change, would you get up the next morning and still try and transition to electric vehicles and get rid of coal? You still would. There's all these other benefits. I mean, childhood asthma in Australia is massively high, and a lot of that's linked to the kind of particulate matter. So even without the climate change, even if you don't think it exists, there's all these other reasons there which really make it. All right, we're going to go to Professor Sproul, and then we're going to go to David on this question. What are the economic costs and benefits of going net zero?
And that's a great point, Craig, that you make about health. I mean, I think health is one of the big things that we're going to see an improvement. If you've looked at modern cities like Beijing, Los Angeles, big cities where there is smog many, many days of the year, electric vehicles, renewables, electrification. Sydney, on a bad day when things are terrible, we've got terrible air pollution, and renewables and electricity make that much, much, much better. Look, the cost, I've been in the field for 40 years, and in the early days, renewables were ridiculously expensive. The last 5 years, that's changed. Renewables are now the cheapest option, and so I think that is slowly working its way through everyone's thinking. It's much of what has to change is how people think. Well, mate, can I do a quick survey? Who's got solar on their rooftop? Fantastic. Well done. So 20 years ago, that would have been, one or two people or none. Everyone who's got solar on their rooftop is now getting electricity when you use it in your home at about a quarter or a fifth of the price you're paying from the grid, regardless of its source. So solar is cheap. Wind is also similarly inexpensive. You can't put that on your roof, but out in the field, that's fantastic. I think I've got my graphic has vanished, but the previous one. Yeah, there it is.
Previous one.
Yeah. Look, interestingly, this is electricity use in Australia over the last 30 years, 20 years. Interestingly, the last 15 years, our electricity usage has stopped going up despite population increase. And much of that has to do with energy efficiency. So energy efficiency has held our electricity usage total, everyone's electricity usage, flat. So being efficient is a wonderful thing. That's meant that we've not had to build new power stations. We've not had to build new transmission lines as we were doing for the decades before. We're now in a position where we're watching our old coal-fired power stations, our old gas-fired power stations reach end of life, and as they do, we can transition to the renewables. This transition to renewables is really just waiting for old coal-fired power stations and gas stations to shut down. Once someone says their economic life is over, renewables can take their place, no problems. And that is accelerating. 10 years ago, we were getting about 3% of our electricity from solar and wind. We're now at 30% solar and wind in the grid. So that's a factor of 10 every decade. One more decade, we have renewables will dominate our electricity supply and be the lowest cost, as Terry pointed out.
And I'd also point out that one of the things about putting solar on and getting more renewable into the system is that it actually forces coal-fired power stations to close down earlier than they would have otherwise. So the Hazelwood Power Station in Victoria actually was closed down by the owners because the renewables hitting into the system had kind of undermined the business model they were running, and it actually led to a closing down. So at the moment we're trying to, step it carefully so they go, but the more and more quicker we get the renewables into the system, the quicker we actually close those down. I want to close them down when they look sweet and they've got years left to run, okay? That's what I think too. All right, David, well, you're a great example of somebody who knows the actual economic costs and benefits of going net zero. You've done an amazing amount of work at Colourmaker. Talk us through it.
Okay, there's two lines over on that graph over there. There's a really jagged line, which is the individual monthly invoices, and then there's the yellow line, which is the smooth one. So if you've got seasonality, it's a 12-month moving average. So prior to going solar, you can see the thing was going up and up and up. It was averaging about $24,000 a year for the 12 months prior, and then in fact the bill just before we went solar was August 2019. That was $2,500. So we put solar in, it started generating in September 2019, and by January we actually had a negative bill. And I was thinking, how good's this? So you can see how it sort of flattened out at the bottom of the yellow line, so it came down a lot. So it came down from about $24,000 to $6,000, and that stayed like that until we put a battery in, and then the battery actually made it go negative. And that was a tiny battery by comparison with what we were generating. It was only 3% of our average daily output. So we've since put one in. We've since put one in that's 10 times the size, but we've only got a couple of months' data under our belt from that. But we're aiming to be net zero by the end of the year. So prior to going solar, we were paying $2,000 a month. Now it's negative, and we're also driving 3 EVs entirely off the roof at zero carbon footprint, zero cost.
David, can I ask you, because I think solar, the kind of economic case for solar is very obvious in most of the Australian states. The kind of payback time, once you've paid it back, kind of goes from best case scenario for 3 to 4 years up to about 5 to 6 years, depending on where you are in the country. It's fairly obvious that the battery's been a bit of a harder debate at the moment. The batteries are still quite expensive. I know last week the Minister announced a new policy. If you've got solar or you're about to get solar, you can get between $1,600 and $2,400 off a battery, but batteries are still quite expensive there. The economics of putting the battery on, do you think you're ahead financially yet, or do you have any sense of how many years it will take?
Absolutely, the battery is a huge winner, and but I think the biggest bang for buck is if you got solar and you can charge your vehicles up, because that's all imported oil and diesel, and that's all sending petrodollars off to regimes that don't have the best sort of record in the world. So we've all got choices to make. So if you can make that choice, I know it's a big upfront cost, but it's morally it stacks up really well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting thing about the upfront costs, and this is one of the things is because we know it's a big upfront cost but a big benefit later, and at the moment we're struggling for those upfront costs. The more we can get government to help with that, I think is good. So that's why it's good to actually see a battery policy finally in New South Wales on that front.
The other thing that I'd say is with ICE, conventional fuel powered vehicles, they burn a lot hotter. Only 35% of the energy that goes into your fuel tank comes out as propulsion. The other 2/3 is wasted, and it causes warmer communities.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the least efficient thing. You were going to add to that, Sproul?
Just a quick one. 15 million vehicles in Australia. If we swap to electric vehicles now, each of those vehicles costs around $2,000 a year to run on fossil fuels, so about $30 billion a year in Australia. The amount of solar and wind we need to install, either on a rooftop or out in the country somewhere, is to power all those electric vehicles is $30 billion up front 1 year. So in 1 year, we would pay back the oil price if we went solar, wind, electric vehicle.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Just the fuel costs.
It's interesting. There's a lot of stories about EV prices plummeting at the moment. I'm loving those stories. Now, Tesla 3 is down like 55 grand at the moment. And it's interesting the kind of concerns you still see about it. Like I just drove an EV to Tasmania and back. It was fine. It's interesting, it's overcoming these. It's obviously these kind of barriers as we have a change. Is it difficult? What do we do? But again, we need a lot more. We need a lot more investment in EV chargers around. I was looking at Northern Beaches when I was coming up here. There's a few. We need more, obviously, but it's happening slowly. All right, question. Sorry, yeah?
We have a plan.
And if you want to know more about the state government's one, please talk to the Drive EV
yeah,
tent.
exactly.
We've certainly got plans.
Yeah, exactly. And if you do have an EV and you don't think it's enough charges, hassle them. Professor Sprout, what are the advances in technology that will help us get to that next level? It's interesting, there obviously are some areas where, some processes in manufacturing, for instance, or long-term, big trucks and buses and that kind of stuff, can we go to electric? All these kind of questions. What are the kind of changes that are coming that are going to make a big difference?
Yeah, look, there's always going to be change. I think if my slide's up, I think there's a few. Ooh.
Next one. There
it is, yeah. I'll try and remember what I wrote. Look, I think the interest... I'm always cautious when I'm... Oh, thank you. Oh, that's lovely. Thanks, Craig. I'm always cautious about this question. And this might be a different one, but I'll go on to this. Oh, yeah, okay, there's two questions. All right, yeah, all right. Look, I think the answers are here and now. We've got the technology here and now to do households, and most commercial businesses can go renewable and energy efficient and electric. Heat pumps are fantastic. If you're burning gas in your house, particularly if it's unflued for your heating, what a good transition to go to renewable reverse cycle air conditioning. Unflued gas heaters really, I'm not sure if that's another bit of homework that Craig might help me out, but unflued gas heaters in public schools really should be gone. My wife tells me they're gone, but I'm not sure we've got rid of all of them. Those things are dreadful for health, asthma, etc., bad learning outcomes. So transitioning now, we should be doing all those things now. Longer term, and I think I've got, this is my house up here, which is a net zero house, and we're putting out a lot more solar than we consume. We're putting out 3 times what we buy in. That's a cost-effective solution, and it's thermally comfortable, it's well insulated, it's shaded, all of those sorts of things. We can be comfortable, we can stop endangering future of our children and grandchildren by destroying our atmosphere, making our atmosphere far worse and far more dangerous for future generations or all of us. The difficult thing is, so I want to say, if the next slide's up, yeah, great. Look, we're really just at the start of where we are in terms of electricity. I've been on the planet since the middle of the last century, roughly. Electricity's only been around in Australia since the start of the last century. So in my lifetime, I've seen half of the electric age, which is sometimes surprising to me. So the advances I've seen in my lifetime are just really the beginning of where we're at with electricity. For solar photovoltaics, when I started in the industry in 1985 in Brookvale, BP Solar in 1985, we were making 12% efficient modules. Solar modules now are 25, 26% efficient, and the theoretical limit is 85. So we've still got a lot of work to do. There's still incredible advances to be made, but it's here, it's now, it's the cheapest deal in town. We need to go renewable, we need to go now. And look, you know, there's some hard to abate. I think large-scale trucking, etc., that may be actually easier to do than we imagine if we're smart. That's using a lot of energy and probably one of the most polluting forms of transport. We should focus on that and get rid of it. Steel making, smelting, all sorts of materials and metals are switching to electric when they can. Can we come up with better ways? If anyone's ever cut themselves on an oyster shell, you'll realise just how hard that is. Mother Nature can make incredibly amazing materials and doesn't need a furnace. We take the hard approach. We say if we wanted to make something as hard and as tough as an oyster shell, we would need 1,000 degrees and a whole lot of materials to be melted down. So we can learn from Mother Nature, and I think that's going to be one of the exciting things of the future, that we learn to live on this planet in harmony with nature and not causing harm.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity with this kind of stuff as well, is that, you know, with steel, for instance, Australia at the moment, we dig up all of the minerals, we send them to China to be made, we bring them back here to do something like a back and forth. If we move to a position whereby green steel, so steel made with renewables, whether it be through hydrogen or otherwise, can be made here, suddenly Australia has an advantage because we've got so much renewable energy. Suddenly we go, well, hang on a second, we can dig it up and we can do the next process, which is where most of the value add is. Now that's all we're in the early stages, but there's a lot of opportunities as well and that kind of changes that are going to happen there. All right, the next question's here for David and Yanni. David, I think you've answered a lot of these questions about how you turned your vision into a reality and your plan for making a local business go net zero. I actually just want to ask you a question. So given you've already kind of explained this, I want to ask you the next question. Do you own the building you're in, or did you have to talk to the owners of the building? Because a lot of people who have a warehouse or have this kind of amazing roof space above them, it can be difficult to actually then go, hang on a second, I don't own this. How do I put solar on that kind of stuff? How did you deal with that? Did you own the space you're in?
Very, very fortunate. Yes, we do. We do own it.
And have you spoken to you? Because presumably you have businesses coming to you and saying, I've heard your story. You've got these amazing changes that have been made. Just some of them kind of run into that problem that, we lease our space, we can't get the owner to actually put it on. Do you think there's a way that governments and councils, hypothetically speaking, sitting next to you, could help with that process?
Absolutely, absolutely. So 2 years ago, 3 months after the Ukraine invasion, Germany mandated every commercial and industrial building by 2027 must have solar on the roof. Now here's a fun fact. You were talking about how Australia's got great solar resources. We get more sunshine than any other country in the world. We don't have an opportunity to be a renewables energy superpower. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to do that. If you look at Germany, the same panel on our roof in Brookvale will generate between 1/3 and 2/3 more electricity than the same panel in Germany. Yet they're going all in with solar, and we're subsidising fossil fuel exports to the tune of $22,500 a minute.
I must admit, when you look at the overall statistics, and Germany's ahead of us in solar, I feel insulted. We cannot have Germany beating for solar.
No, and they've gone further in Germany. By 2029, every single roof has to do that. So I would suggest that governments do have a role to mandate that if you're a particularly commercial business owner, a commercial property owner, then it's an investment. It's not something where mum and dad live. It's an investment. So part of the cost of owning that building will be to put solar on the roof. And we need to start now.
Terry, you should be writing this down.
We need to start now, so we start developing the industry for it rather than waiting until 2027 and then having it all happen in a rush.
Absolutely. I know there's actually a great group. You're talking about Brookvale. In Brookvale, there's Brookvale Solar Alliance Group, who kind of did a study of all the... If you put solar panels on top of just all of the warehouses in the area, it would basically be able to power the whole of Brookvale every summer day. That's how much you get. So it's this untapped potential. It's just crazy that we need to use it more.
And that's only 65% of the roofs down there would give us 2.5 megawatts.
There you go. We need Davids everywhere. All right. Just to add to that, Yanni, what can businesses do if they are wanting to go on this journey and become more solar efficient? Now, what can they do? They can come to you, council, for instance.
Yeah. So we've got a sustainable business network. Ed mentioned that earlier, and it'd be great if you get in contact with us to be involved, those of you that have businesses, of course. The next and probably the most important thing for now, because this is on the boil as we speak, is if you've got a business that uses more than 100 kilowatts of energy per annum, which there's no question that there's numerous examples of that out there, get involved with the PPA, because there's great opportunity there to end up purchasing renewable electricity. And of course, before all of that, as Alistair mentioned, energy efficiency is super important. You want to start at that point where you reduce your energy consumption as much as you practically can, and by doing so, we can also help you with that. So council's got a lot of, can provide you with a lot of support and advice regarding that.
Yeah, and it is good, but energy efficiency is actually the low-hanging fruit. And I kind of think sometimes I forgot this. When we were doing the Fight for Planet A show, we worked with a school, part of the public school system, to try and reduce their emissions. Now, they couldn't get solar on quick enough. You know, that's the easy way to do it. Just by doing things like looking at how they were using their energy, turning off lights and other particular things over the weekends, figuring out how their heating was going, the kids managed to kind of reduce their emissions by 40 to 50%. And it kind of blew me away, to be honest, because we often forget that stuff, but it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit, it's cheaper to do generally, and a really immediate feedback. So I just wanted to look at.
Sort of an unsolicited but important plug here. If you are in that business community, additionally on the New South Wales government website, so it's energy.nsw.gov.au, there is a whole section for business, but my area looks after something we call our business decarb program, and it looks at that whole end-to-end solutioning that you can do as a business, and that's embedding it into your executive plans. It's metering and monitoring packages, so where is your energy going, what processes are using the most, and where are those opportunities, and then through to how can you take advantage of the different government schemes, or just the things that pay off immediately to replace gas processes with heat pumps, or insulate your roof. All of those sorts of things are stacked into that. But it's a lot of the challenge, and I certainly appreciate it, is that you don't know where to start, and that's true of every household, and that's true of every business. It's really, really difficult to know what that first step is, and a little bit of guidance on that journey as well. Just take a step. It doesn't really matter which one, and then you'll learn from it. And
one at a time. You don't have to do a little once. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, just on energy efficiency, Australia could do better. We're doing quite well. We've flattened that curve. We could do better. Some years ago, in the top 30 largest economies, Australia was ranked 12th for energy efficiency. We're now 18th, behind Indonesia and ahead of Turkey. So we could do better on energy efficiency, particularly from government policy. But I guess, Terry can pass that on to... it would be good to have targets too. If we have renewable targets, it would be good to have energy efficiency targets as well.
Okay, I'm going to... Oh, you go?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, this isn't quite on the same point, but you brought up schools and stuff. One of the really easy things you can do, or that at least I did, easiest lobby of my life was like talking to my school about getting solar panels installed. That was when I was in like year 7, and we have solar panels.
Yes, every school should have solar panels. All right, I'm going to actually skip the last question because I think we've covered a lot. We'll get to it right at the end if we have time. But I want to get to questions from you guys. So, whoa, quickly up there, lady in the red. Absolutely.
I want to see zero waste legislation, and I want to see people wake up to the fact that we can't keep generating waste because that is wasting energy.
Here. And just on that point, to answer it, I think you're right. This is the thing that we're starting to do. So this kind of proposal before government is about making sure that every company has to look at their entire stream, and you have to know that This is the transport that went into it. This is the minerals. This is all of that. And then you'll actually know how much it is. And I totally agree that's the way we need to be going. And I do also agree with you that waste to energy, which is sometimes seen as this very positive thing, generally speaking, if you go to waste to energy, the thing they don't talk about, there was a plant built in Perth recently. They did not even factor in the CO2 released by burning the materials. What do we have a lot of in our waste? Plastic. What is plastic? Oil. What happens when you burn oil? You release CO2. So just, if your council does come to you and starts talking about waste to energy, just say to them, remember that that's predominantly an oil burning plant. So yeah, good to keep that. Nice question. So yeah, we'll go this way, we'll go back and forth. Yes, sir. Lady, madam.
My name is Connie, and I'm also with Doctors for the Environment, and I would like to say thank you that health was mentioned. With Doctors for the Environment, we certainly have a different target to get to zero much faster, because it is simply needed for our health. It's not, we as humans are hugely endangering ourselves if we just go to net zero by, 2050. That is ridiculous. We need to get there much faster. And there are many, many things how we get there. A lot was mentioned. One thing which was not mentioned is deforestation, or the capacity, basically the capacity of our bushland to hold carbon, best if it is pristine bushland. And I think from that point of view, that is another aspect which we really must keep there and focus.
Yeah, absolutely. We do need to start. David, did you want to answer that? Do you want, hang on a sec.
Our business is aiming to be net zero by the end of this year, which is 213 days away.
Yeah, that's good. And look, it's a controversial thing with net zero as well, because people talk about buying offsets. So saying, I create this many emissions and I'm going to buy an offset over here to take away from that. And it's a difficult area because sometimes there's some really dodgy operators there. There are, and the question is, I'm just putting this as a question, is in some cases if you cannot ameliorate something like, so at the moment taking a flight for instance, it's very hard to find an alternative to that. I would certainly buy an offset, and I try and find things that ensure that, for instance, it protects biodiversity of places, so that money is used to make sure that trees don't get knocked down. It gives a value to those forests, and again, it's a very difficult area, but hopefully it can have positive aspect in that.
The quick thing, my quick response on that is just we've got to stop burning fossil fuels. What happens is that what Mother Nature took about 1 million years to form as fossil fuels underground, we dig up and release that 1 million years of stored carbon in 1 year. So if we're trying to offset with forests, we've got to make sure those forests stay around for another 1 million years.
Yeah, exactly. Down here, sir, you had a question up earlier, quickly.
Thank you, Councillor. It's commendable that the council put on this sort of event. I happen to bring along a carbon dioxide monitor, and I can tell you that the carbon emissions during the course of this presentation has risen 20%. Maybe we need a back from up the front from some of the hot air that's sort of coming in. Still.
It's probably mostly your breath, sir.
It's a proximity monitor.
I commend David from Colour Makers, because that is the way that we're going to achieve this change. We have to invest to be able to do that, and I congratulate you on your achievements for that. The energy companies, pardon me, the energy companies are selling this green energy, which is still based on fossil fuels. So I think there's a misnomer here in buying this green energy per se.
What are you saying, sir? Why is the green energy based on fossil? Can you actually give us some facts? Because at the moment it's a bit rambling.
Well, it's a way forward, but I mean there's a misnomer there. But still, they're asking us to do the investment to be able to put in these solar systems, which are okay. But I don't believe that the energy companies are giving us a fair price for what we're contributing for the solar generation.
I agree with you, sir. And can I actually say on that front, the next session we have is on solar panels and solar power, and we've actually got representatives from, for instance, the Ausgrid and that kind of stuff, so we can get into the nitty-gritty a bit more on that. Any more general questions? Let me go right to the back. The lady right at the back. Sorry, I saw you first. Yes, you. You put your hand up. We'll go to you, and then the lady at the right. We've got to wrap up pretty soon, but we do have another session coming up.
Thank you, and commendation to the council for putting this event on today. It's fantastic. My name's Sophie Drysdale, and I manage the education projects of the Centre of Excellence in Sustainable Fashion and Textiles, which is a collaboration between the University of Technology and TAFE New South Wales. So apologies for this question because it probably does relate more to the final segment, but some interesting facts out this week. Australia is now the biggest consumer of textiles in the world. We've just surpassed the United States. We now consume 56 items a year. 200,000 tonnes of textiles go to landfill every year. So to put that into perspective, that is the equivalent of Sydney Harbour. So my question is probably to council around what initiatives are you working towards for textile recycling? We do chemical recycling once a year. Is there an initiative to facilitate some sort of textile recycling in the community? Because I know I feel guilty when I want to put my cotton sheets, my toweling somewhere, and I don't really trust companies like H&M to do the right thing. I think they're shipped offshore and they go to the countries like Ghana where they go to landfill.
Wrong guy, but I'll have a crack. It's because my side is environment and climate change, so I work in a division which is called environment and sustainability. One side is my side, and the other side is the waste and cleansing crew. And Andrew Ward-Harvey, who's in the crowd, no doubt, or he'll certainly be up on the stage later on in the day, will be able to give you the precise answer. But I do know that Andrew's been looking at programs for textiles. It's a tricky prospect because there's a lot of it, and can I just say that also it relates to not only levels of affluence, but certainly in different circumstances, people buy and sell and get rid of stuff very quickly. And so if that is a problem here on the Northern Beaches, then I'm sure that the waste team is looking at it. But you'll get more info about that in the...
We will be finding about
in the waste
later.
stuff later.
And the clothes recycling is really hard, but there are really easy solutions for clothes problems like that. Buy less, wear it longer, wear it more, repair it. Easy stuff all of us can do. All right, thank you very much to our great panel. Thank you for everyone coming along. We're going to have there'll be about a 5-minute break, and then we've got our next panel, which is on solar power and solar energy.